Hi guys, I wanted to hop on here and check in with you. I'm hoping to use videos for the rest of our time together. I think it makes it a little bit easier. Just reading instructions can get really hard. So now that I've had a week to figure it out, I'm going to try this. So you'll have to give me some feedback and let me know how it works. So first of all, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're staying home and that you had a little bit of a relaxing spring break. Um, if we look at what I want to do with today's video, I want to go over Friday's homework from before spring break, which was the Rock Pocket Mouse application questions. I want to review the Rock Pocket Mice lab goals. And we want to work towards completing the 3 lab objectives that we're going to go over. And then you'll have some time to work on your assignment for today, which is the natural selection model redo. Okay, so first of all, Friday's homework was to do the application questions for the Rock Pocket Mouse Lab. So what you were given was a data table where they took data from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different places, and they told you the soil color. So you see 3 of the soils were light and 3 were dark, and then it had you calculate the percentage of tan mice or light mice. So here's the percentages that you should have got. And then for your first question, number 10, it says which of the population show variation? Well, anything that isn't 0 or 100% tan mice. So you should have gotten Tule Well, you should have gotten Lava East, and O'Neill Pass. What patterns do you notice in the data? You might have said something like Tule Well and O'Neill Pass have the most mice. There are both light and dark mice at O'Neill Pass, which is kind of interesting. And that Lava East and West have very few mice. And then if we look at the data, not much seems surprising initially because there's light mice, or there's light soil, and then there's a high percentage of tan mice. And then there's light soil and a high percentage of tan mice. Dark soil, low percentage of tan mice, dark, low, dark, low. But O'Neill Pass is kind of funny. It has light soil, but it only has 44% tan mice. So probably one of your biggest inferences is maybe there's no predators in this area. And that's kind of an interesting thought because if there were no predators in our lab, evolution wouldn't have happened. So that's kind of one of the main points that you should see is these 4 are evidence for, or these, 5 are evidence for evolution, but then O'Neill Pass stands out as something different happening there. Okay, so that's a review of Friday's homework, and then let's go back to a quick review of our Pocket Mouse Lab. Okay, so this is probably where you want to get out your notebook and write down the 3 objectives, and then we're going to take a few items down about them. So by the end of this lab, and the lab actually ends with today's assignment, you should be able to define evolution and the word population. You should be able to describe what evolution in a population looks like with a graph. Explain the process of how evolution of a population occurs, identify the 3 ingredients for natural selection, and define variability, heritability, reproductive advantage, and adaptation. Okay, so let's take a look at our graphs. Just to remind you, we had 2 locations, location A, and what your graph should have looked like was something like this. And with this, we would say there's very little change in the population over time. Like there's a little bit of flux, but generally location A pretty much stays the same. At location B, where you had the volcanic eruption, something very different comes up in the data. The number of light mice decreased and the number of dark mice increased. So we would say that evolution has occurred in population B. So the definition of evolution, and this is one of the first things you want to write down, is heritable change in a population over time. So, actually, I can present this to make this a little bigger. Let me see if this looks any better for you. Oops, okay. There we go. We would say that the mouse population changed from being mostly light colored to being mostly dark color over time. So the mouse population has evolved. So this is an example of evolution. It's pretty simple. Just change in a population over time. So if we could look at a little bit more detailed definition of evolution, you guys could say the heritable change in a population over time. Or I actually think you should be able, with your genetic background, to understand something like this: change in allele frequency of a population over time. So we'll look at an example of that. But before we do that, let's make sure we all understand what a population is. So a population is defined as the members of the same species living in the same place. For example, the population of the people in Washington. It's pretty simple. Or the population of deer in Tazewell County. So let's make sure we know what a population is. So change in a population over time. Let's look at this example. So if we were looking at location B, let me just pick a key for us. Let's say that big B is equal to white and little b is equal to black. If I were to look at any one of the mice, they could be big B, or big B, little b. And then I would have very few little b's. Okay? And then over time, the allele frequency is changed. So each one of these letters is an allele or a different form of a gene. And over time, we would see that there is less big B's and there's more little b's over time. So that's the genetics behind change in a population over time. Okay, so what we should have just accomplished right there is we should have accomplished our first bullet point and our second bullet point. So you should be able to define evolution as heritable change in a population over time, or change in allele frequencies in a population over time. Describe what evolution looks like in a graph, and we have that example right here. And the next one we're going to work on is the third bullet point of explain the process of how evolution of a population occurs. Okay, so here is just the ingredients for how evolution occurs. So one way that a population can change over time is by natural selection. And I'm going to come back to the screen. It's easier for me to use the pointer. Natural selection is the process that explains how a population changes over time. So that's a good thing to write down in your notebook as well. So hopefully in your notebook so far, you have the definition of evolution, you have the definition of a population, and you have an example graph for what evolution looks like. The next thing you want to write down is natural selection. There is 3 things that has to be present in a population in order for natural selection to occur. First of all, there must be variability in the population. What does that mean? There must be differences between the individuals. Okay, so the individuals could be different color. They could have different size necks, like you're going to see in our next example. The second thing is whatever that variation is must be a heritable trait. It has to be a trait that, in order for a population to change over time, it has to be a trait that can be passed on to your offspring. So an example of something that's not a heritable trait is maybe organisms are susceptible to some sort of environmental toxin, and they have a disease because of that. And that disease is not because they inherited it. That disease is because they have an environmental toxin there. Or more simply, I have an awful tattoo on my toe. It's a toe ring, but my 2 boys that were born do not have that tattoo on their toe because it's not a heritable trait. So it's easy to think of non-heritable traits with humans. It's a little more difficult with animals. But we'll look at some more examples of this as we go along. And then the third thing is whatever that trait is has to give the individuals with that trait some sort of reproductive advantage. So an example of this is individuals of some colors are more successful at reproducing than others because they are more likely to survive to adulthood. The end result of natural selection is the population will almost all of the population will have that adaptation, which we saw in the pocket mice because almost all the population in the end had the darker color. So over multiple generations, the trait that is more successful increases in the population, leading to most all organisms in the population having that trait. So adaptations in populations, why are there adaptations? usually because that trait gives them some sort of reproductive advantage. Okay, let's look at natural selection just real quick here. So at the beginning of this, I think we got to this in class. I asked you, are you smarter than Charlie? And who are we referring to as Charlie Darwin? Here's a picture of him. And he is the person who came up with natural selection that we just looked at here. And we'll look at it again. And he named it natural selection. He came up with the process, and then he provided much evidence. So he published all this evidence that he collected over 50 years in a book called On Origin of the Species. And he chose the word natural selection because he, at that time, which is in the 1800s, was very familiar with how humans had changed dog breeds. And that was done through artificial selection. That if you wanted to have Cocker Spaniels with short tails, you would pick all the Cocker Spaniels with short tails to mate with each other and then not let the other Cocker Spaniels mate. And so over time, you would artificially select. He's like, well, this is kind of like artificial selection, but nature is doing the selection. So he called it natural selection. Okay, so let's look at an example of Charlie Darwin's natural selection. Okay, here's the model that I created. So hopefully this makes sense to you. What you'll be doing with your assignment for today is doing this same thing right here with your pocket mice. So some of you did it here, but most people, when they do it, don't have all the steps. They don't have the variability, the heritability, and the reproductive advantage. In fact, if I look at this one, they don't really have that variation is important. They don't have that it has to be heritable, and they don't really explain reproductive advantage. So what would that look like if you did do this? Well, here's the example I did for you guys. All right, so we know that giraffes used to have shorter necks. So when we look at them in the fossil record, we find that the necks of giraffe used to be shorter. So the population has changed over time to today having most giraffes have much longer necks. So how could that happen? Well, Charlie Darwin would say through natural selection. Here's how he explain it. See, there was a population of giraffes, and the population of giraffes had variability. Some had long necks, some had short necks. Okay. Then he would go on to say that trait of your neck size is a heritable trait, meaning that offspring have a neck length that is very close to that of their parents. So it says, look, Mom, my neck is long, just like yours. Okay, reproductive advantage. I had to do it in mine. I felt like it made more sense in 2 steps. I had to explain why it was a reproductive advantage. So I did it with survive better and then the reproductive advantage down here. So a 4-year drought occurred and all of the easy to reach leaves were eaten. The only leaves left were those at the top of the tree. Only the long-necked giraffes can reach the leaves. So here's an acacia tree, which is one of the trees that giraffes eat in their native environment. And here's a long-necked giraffe, and he can reach the leaves. And this short-necked giraffe says, I'm so hungry, I feel so weak. All right, so we're seeing here that having a long neck has an advantage because you're able to get more food, but you cannot forget the next step. It's really important, and a lot of my students that did this last year forgot this step. Okay, that leads to a reproductive advantage. Short-necked giraffes grow weak and are more likely to die of starvation, or they're more likely to get eaten by lions because they don't have as much energy to run away. Therefore, only long-necked giraffes survive the drought and they then go on and reproduce. So the parts that students missed on this was they did not put that they reproduce. They might say the population thrives, but you have to have offspring, and then the offspring looks more like you. So these guys die off. These guys reproduce. And then over many generations of having this trait of being able to reach the high leaves when there was a drought, over many generations, the population changed, the number of giraffes with long necks increased, and evolution by natural selection occurred. So what you guys need to do is you guys need to get yourself like a piece of notebook paper or computer paper, and you need to draw out the steps. You're going to have 5 boxes, and then underneath the boxes, you're going to have a caption. You're going to draw out the steps using this as your model. you're going to have all of the same red words. And instead of doing this one, which was missing some of the steps, you're going to redraw it and describe what you see and then answer your questions for how did your original model compare to the one that you just did. This is then going to serve as notes for you. What I'd like you to do also is I'd like you to take a picture of this and upload it right here to this slide where it says upload your drawing here. So this is going to be your drawing of how the rock pocket mice had the variability, heritability, and survive better, reproductive advantage, and the end result of is adaptation. So you're going to use these boxes to describe how natural selection occurred in the rock pocket mice. Okay, this is due for you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to do another video for you. I'm going to try to do a video every day, and hopefully that's a little more helpful for you. And that's my end of my instruction for today. Hope that helps. I miss you guys, and I hope you're doing well. I think about you guys a lot. And email me if you have any questions at all, specifically if you have any questions about technology. All right, guys, that's it for tonight. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Take care.